You're listening to Booth Talk from the After Movie Diner, and our guest today is from Canada, and it's quite apt as I'm recording this on Canada Day, July 1st, 2019. So happy Canada Day to everyone listening from Canada. It's a fantastic country, and I love you all. Yes, our guest today is writer, director, producer, editor, actor, you name it, he does it, Jesse Thomas Cook, who, with his filmmaking company of Foresight Features, has been putting together and releasing films for about the last 10 years. Basically, him and his group take it in turns to kind of write or direct or act or whatever it is, and they've been making up to 10 films. That was their goal. Anyway, we get into all of this in the interview, but it was fantastic to talk to Jesse today, and I hope you really enjoy it. It is just yet another example of a great indie film collective kind of banging out movies in a part of the world and releasing them and getting them out there and people seeing them and people loving them. And that is what we're all about here at the After Movie Diner. You may know, if you listen to the other show or if you read our website, that we have filmmaking friends in New England and in Baltimore and all around the country that we support and admire and think are great. I love that real true indie spirit of getting together a few friends and just actually making movies. So that's what we talk about with Jesse. We talk about his new zombie film, Deadsight, which has the fantastic premise of what if you woke up partially blind in a zombie apocalypse and the only person who could save you was a heavily pregnant police officer. Yes, that is where Deadsight begins. You can only imagine where it goes. So we talk about Deadsight, which is out tomorrow, July 2nd, 2019, on VOD, on digital HD, and on DVD. So run over to Amazon, Vudu, iTunes, wherever you rent or purchase movies, and do that tomorrow after you've heard this interview. But anyway, without further ado, let us get to Jesse Thomas Cook.
Hey, John, how's it going, man?
Good, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome to the Booth Talk from the After Movie Diner. It's great to have you on the show today, and a real pleasure to be talking to you.
Oh, pleasure's all mine. Thank you, John.
Big fan of indie horror, and especially of Canadian films in general, so always a pleasure to talk to a Canadian filmmaker. There have been a lot of zombie films throughout the decades, but especially sort of in the last sort of 10 to 15 years. What made you want to tell this story in particular?
Zombie films have always been my favorite films, my favorite subgenre of horror, ever since I was very young, in the late 80s and in the early 90s. And then once I started making films, I got the chance to produce a zombie film. I produced Exit Humanity in 2011, but I never got the chance to direct one. I'd done monster films, creature features, haunted house films. Never got a chance to do zombie film, and so I felt like I was coming late to the table here because of the huge following from The Walking Dead and whatnot, and what you mentioned, the last 10, 15 years especially. So I guess because it was going to be our last film we were going to make as our company, we had made 9 films together, and we were supposed to make one more, and I was going to direct it. I thought, well, what the hell? I'd like to go out making a zombie film, just for my own satisfaction, basically, not even to get on a trend or anything. And so my wife and I sat down. My wife Liv, so she played Mara in the film, and we met with our writer Kevin. And I just said, look, I just want to do a zombie film. So we started throwing ideas around, and then we stumbled upon the idea, what about just following like a blind guy through the zombie world, like basically the same world Romero set up so long ago, but we were deciding to follow a blind guy. And the first draft of it was a comedy. It was very funny. It was like watching Mr. Bean, like in a zombie outbreak. And it wasn't until the second draft we sat down and thought maybe we could make something really scary here with this blindness, because it lends itself to being absolutely terrifying if we don't know what's around each corner. And then adding Liv's character Mara in, there was always going to be a female police officer, but she was 7 months pregnant at the time, and we asked if she wanted to do it, and she said she did. So we thought, that's another sort of big vulnerable character trait, having this blind guy and this very pregnant police officer having to team up and help each other in order to survive. I hope that answers your question, John.
Oh no, it does, and it definitely it's definitely what I was sort of thinking when I was watching the film as well. So that does make complete sense. And you also touched on something. So while I'm aware of some of the other films that have come out that you've been involved in general, I didn't know how all the sort of pieces stuck together. I saw that Liv had obviously co-written this film and had starred in another film that you had produced. I had seen that Adam Seybold, your star, was also a writer on Let Her Out, and your cinematographer, Jeff Marr, had worked on that, and there was Creep Nation, which you're on a sort of a producer on, and there's John Geddes, who you've worked with. So I was kind of sensing, obviously there was this independent community there, but obviously it's a company. So explain how that company kind of came together, or how that community came together. And then secondly, why is Deadsight the last film from this company?
Sure. So we, John Geddes and I, in 2006, made our first film. It's a horrible cannibal film called Scarce that we starred in, and it was shot on film. That was before there was even digital cameras.
Yeah.
But prior to that, we had done a couple short films, and we had, tried to go to Hollywood and get people to read our scripts and stuff. But we ended up making this film Scarce. And despite how bad it was, it didn't do too bad, like in terms of sales internationally. So we thought, why don't we make a company, instead of just making a one-off film, let's try to start a business of making many films. So we're going to make 10 films, basically. And we added a third colleague, Matt Wheely. And Matt and John and I had grown up in a small town together. We went to high school together. So we set up Foresight Features, and we made Monster Brawl and Exit Humanity in 2011. Then we made 3 films all in one summer: Ejecta, Hellmouth, and Septic Man. And so I did Septic Man, John directed Hellmouth, Matt directed Ejecta. We all produced them, but we also hired as co-producers Chad Archibald and Cody Callahan, and they went on to start Black Fawn Films, which is what you're alluding to with Let Her Out. They've done a number of films. But the sort of the whole thing started for us from making this little cannibal film Scarce about 12 years ago. And after that, we made a number of films: Hexecutioners, The Horde, Creep Nation, and then it got to the end. It was the end of the company. We're only supposed to make 10 films, and this was the 10th, and we all wanted to sort of go off and do our own things now. And so and it was my turn to direct. So I said, well, let's do, I want to do a zombie film. Only for myself too. Again, this wasn't, I didn't care if it ever got put out or if it got into festivals or if it got sold. I was like, I want to do a zombie film because I love zombie films. And I think by having that attitude of sort of not even being attached to outcome, it's ended up doing very, very well for us. Believe it or not, it's Deadsight has been one of the films, especially in the later part of our company, that's done phenomenally well.
Yeah, no, I can understand why, definitely. So the more I explore, I've basically been in the US just under 12 years, and I've been doing the website and interviews and various things for about 7 or 8 years. And the more I explore, the more I find these sort of filming communities and production companies all over North America, kind of giving the impression that indie filmmaking, especially horror indie filmmaking, are very much alive and well. What's your feeling towards the community, how it interlocks, and also the current distribution possibilities that exist for that kind of filmmaking?
Sure. Yeah, I think the community's always been great. I mean, everyone's sort of de facto competitors, I guess, to some degree, but it doesn't feel that way. Like I know, like, you know, even on my last film, I had to call up my friend Justin McConnell. He just directed Life Changer. We all know each other, especially the Toronto group of guys and gals. We can always rely on each other for help, and sometimes we collaborate. Sometimes we do it all on our own. And I think that whole community got started because of Anchor Bay, Canada. Like we were knocking on their door with our first film, Scarce, in 2008. And they put it out. I think it was one of their first sort of made in Canada films. And then from there, you know, they started like putting out a number of films of local filmmakers, even though they were this American company out of this Toronto office with Susan Karen and Rob Perholtz. They really fostered that community of, you know, we can make our films, and they would distribute them. Now with Anchor Bay having closed, it's sort of a little bit more of a little bit more difficult. We're still getting good distribution. There's still good Canadian broadcast, which is, you know, we have these like weird Canadian content rules up here, and a lot of tax rebates too. So you can still make a film up here. We're still sort of all navigating the new world of streaming and whatnot. I know it's like some of our films have been on Netflix in the U.S., but we can't get them on Netflix here in Canada, which is weird. Some of my older films are on Shudder, and a couple of them are on TMN. There's different streaming sites, right? So we're still trying to figure that all out, and I don't think anyone has an answer for it yet.
No, it seems to be becoming even more fragmented in the future, and it's funny because I think when DVD and Blu-ray distributors kind of popped up, like the Anchor Bay, like now Shout Factory and so on, you know, they've had to navigate this whole idea of copyright being different. When the studios used to put films out in the 70s and 80s, copyright was different internationally to where it was nationally, and, you know, different areas own different things. And you would have thought in the streaming world, in the modern world, they would have said, let's cut through all that and just have Netflix is Netflix and Hulu is Hulu and Shudder is Shudder. But, you know, sadly, those little copyrights that are tied into contracts from 30 years ago still plague the industry today, I think. And probably the same case with licensing rights for, you know, even new films to this day. They kind of keep making the same mistake, even though the world is much smaller than it used to be.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask, how do you think Canada plays into your films and the stories that you want to tell, if you think it does at all?
Well, I think it does, because we always find ourselves filming in like November or December or in February or March. So the last few films we've done have been very like seasonal, either in late fall or early spring. So that's one thing. But like earlier on in my career, we tried to hide the fact. You know, I'd say, oh, my film's set in Michigan. Go right across the border instead of Ontario. Right. Yeah. I don't know why. It's so stupid to think right now that we did that. But we thought, well, no one's going to buy our film if it's set in Ontario. Of course, that's nonsense, right? So it took us a number of films to even get that. Now I just embrace it. So I like setting my films all around where I grew up, and so Deadsight is, and my last couple films are as well. And so it's nice to sort of just tell these stories and be, you know, not have to hide the location, because it is quite silly if you think about it. No one else, I think, in the world does that except Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, the only time it really happens is, I think, when Americans end up going to like Bulgaria or somewhere and try to make, Sofia, Bulgaria look like a city and whatever. But outside of that, it's funny. I think the history of Canadian culture around the world has been one of those things. And I always like to say this because I was a big fan of the Tragically Hip and Kids in the Hall and stuff growing up in the UK. I always like to say the right people will get it. That's what I always like to say about like Canadian culture in general.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
The right people will get it, and the people who won't get it, forget about it. But look,
because like anyone else would have just go to the United States, like James Cameron or Jim Carrey, the big Canadian celebrities, you'll just go there anyway. So I'm like, I'm not going there. I have a family. I love where I live. So why don't I just make my films here in Canada and have them set there? It makes sense.
Couldn't agree more, man. And I can't wait to see what you do in the future. Talking about which, you alluded that the company is now done and you guys are going off to do your own thing. So what can we expect from you? And can we expect to see some of these guys, like you guys, working together, but in different capacities and so on down the road?
Absolutely. So I have a new company. I started with Liv to make 7 films in the next 2 years. We've just made her directorial debut. So Liv just directed a film in January. I just finished editing it. It's a road trip indie comedy called To Hell with Harvey.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm directing a film next month in July, and then Liv's doing a horror film in the fall. But even on Liv's film, like Matt Wheely was one of the camera guys, and John helped too. So we still help each other. But we just want to, it's sort of like, the band breaking up wanted to do solo records, but still collaborating.
Yeah, of course. Well, look, we'll look forward to it. Deadsight is fantastic, and we'll be promoting it on the site for you. But I wish you all the very best with Deadsight, with its US release on July 2nd. And we'll keep an eye on what you do in the future, sir. So all the very best to you and Liv and the rest of the community.
Thank you so much, man.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Have a good day, too. Bye now. And if you've liked this interview, you can find other interviews like it over at aftermoviediner.com, like the recent interview conducted by Aaron Carruthers with Angus McFadden, who has been doing the rounds with his new movie, Robert the Bruce. That's over on the website right now. Go check it out. Also, if you've enjoyed this show, don't forget to look up Booth Talk on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, wherever podcasts are found, and rate and review us. You can also support the show by going over to patreon.com/aftermoviediner. That's patreon.com/aftermoviediner. Thanks so much for listening. Look forward to our next interview very soon.